day. But for now, we just want to straight away, pave way for the conversation that we had lined up for you this morning. Actually, one of the big stories on the front page of the dailies this particular morning, captured on the Standard there, even as the debates continue following the handing over of the reforms on the report on the police reforms by retired Chief Justice David Kenani Maraga last week to the head of state. And joining me in studio to have this very important conversation, I have a panel of three gentlemen, and sitting on my far right, immediate right, we have Dimas Kiprono, who is the Executive Director, ICJ Kenya. At the center, we are having Dr. J.M. Waiganjo, Commissioner IPOA. We are also having this morning George Musamali, Security Analyst. We appreciate your time. All right, and Dimas Kiprono is the Deputy Executive Director of ICJ Kenya. Of course, thank you, gentlemen, once again for creating time for us this morning. We just want to, sort of dissect the report that was finally handed over to President William Ruto last week. I remember before this official handing over, we had this conversation sort of like to set the pace for what was to happen. I had a privilege to host you in studio, Musamali, and also Dimas Kiprono. And we're also glad that you join us today, Dr. for this. Let's just, first of all, begin this conversation by getting a cocktail of your opening remarks with regards to whether this report, having looked at it or even having had the president himself speak that day, and even the chair of that particular task force talk about what they've been able to achieve. From where you sit and in your analysis, did you feel like the mandate that was given to this particular task force was fully delivered to the nation? I'll start with you, Dimas.
Well, thank you very much. First of all, I'd like to commend the task force for really bringing out certain issues that were glaring. And so, as much as we may not agree on everything that is in the report, because I think in some areas they did not go far enough. I think their hand was in the pulse properly and diagnosed certain glaring issues within the National Police Service that have been a challenge to all Kenyans. And they properly looked at the relationship between the National Police Service and the National Police Service Commission, the role of the Internal Affairs Unit. I did not think that they went far enough to diagnose the systemic corruption and systemic abuse of Kenyans' rights by the National Police Service. Mm-hmm. However, yes, they were in the right track, and we look forward to full implementation of these recommendations. Right. In some areas we might not agree, because as much as they rightfully diagnosed that the National Police Service Commission had given up its mandate a long time ago, is the right thing a negotiated exit, or is the right thing a further interrogation as to why they went that way? And perhaps through a tribunal, so that we don't find ourselves in a situation where you have individuals who've been given a mandate through the Constitution to protect certain institutions, certain rights, and then they take it upon themselves to surrender that mandate, which means that they've betrayed the sovereign people of Kenya. And so are we just going to allow them to get a negotiated exit, or should we find out more?
All right, and we'll talk about that in a bit, because that has formed a very heated conversation. There was a crisis meeting yesterday by the Commission just to discuss that specific issue. Yeah. The meeting actually aborted, but it has been postponed to next week. We'll talk about the National Police Service Commission in a bit. But let me also hear from you, Dr. Waiganjo. The authority was among the groups that made their submissions before the task force that is led by the retired Chief Justice. Having looked at the final product of this process, did it meet your expectations?
I want first to start by thanking the President for the initiation of this task force, because even if there has been other previous task forces still geared towards the reform of the National Police Service, there was need to initiate a further task force to come up with recommendations that are implementable. And the authority, the Independent Policing Oversight Authority, was properly represented in that task force. We had a commissioner, Doreen Mudaura, sitting in that commission. So most of the recommendations that we gave to the task force, we've seen that they are properly in the report. Although the report is very voluminous, and I do not think the report has been properly exposed to the public for public scrutiny, but from the snippets that we are getting, we see that if the recommendations of the report are to be implemented, then we, for the first time, perhaps, we are going to redeem the membership of the National Police Service. Because as you know, we've condemned our police officers for the longest. Every poll that has been done on corruption, the National Police Service are on the top. Whenever there are, say, for instance, demonstrations, you see a lot of hue and cry about police brutality, but we hardly talk about police welfare. And I think that's why the National Police Service Commission was put at the center of this controversy. Because if we have a National Police Service Commission that was formed primarily to handle the matters of welfare of the officers, the matters of promotion, transfers, deployment, then it seems like that mandate is not being carried out properly. Then they become a stumbling block to the reforms of the National Police Service. So I think coming up with this task force was the first step towards probably reforming the National Police Service, because even if the previous task forces even recommended that we move away from the National Police Force to the National Police Service, we just changed the name. Otherwise, the mindset is the same, the leadership is the same, and I think this conversation is very important, and it's time to start talking about what about our National Police Service, what ails our National Police Service, so that we are not always condemning the police officers. If you understand the problems that the National Police, the membership of the National Police Services go through, then I think you would understand why they behave in the manner in which they do.
Really?
Sure, yeah. We have seen even suicides within the service. We have seen, you know, certain brutality that tells you that that person is not himself or herself. It boils down to how they are treated, from their recruitment to their promotions, to their deployment, their transfers, to the way they are treated by their seniors. It is the senior leadership in the National Police Service that has brought all these problems. And that's why this report must be implemented, not only implemented, but that has to be implemented very quickly and very radically. Very radically. It's a very, very urgent.
What you said, I don't know why I just thought about that. It kind of reminded me that puzzle of between the chicken and the egg, which came first, you know, the police behaving the way they do because of the work environment and all that. But we'll talk about that in a bit. I just also want to hear your thoughts on the same Samali. We've been here before. He has just even, you know, highlighted that this is not the first task force. We had the Commission of Inquiry on Post-Election Violence. We better know it as the Waki Report, the Independent Review Commission, the Kriegler Report also, and the Johnston Kavuludi-led National Police Service Commission, which made a lot of recommendations. We are having this report that has been released by the Maraga-led team. Did you see anything different, that it was presenting a breath of fresh air, something that probably was missed from the previous attempt to reform the police service?
Certainly, I've not seen anything different from the previous reports that we had. And trying to reform the police, from my perspective, is like building a ship in the middle of the sea. At the same time, trying to sail that ship. You are there, and while you're doing this, you're doing all this stuff, learning also to do the sailing, and at the same time, you're having people who are attacking that ship, wanting to sink it. That is a daunting task. Remember, we are not starting from nowhere, and we should look at the history of these police reforms you're talking about in 2023. This is not the first time there have been clamor by the public and by the country that we need to reform the police. I remember the first time this came up clearly that we need reforms in the police service was in 1975, when JM Kariuki was killed.
So it was way back even
way
before
back
post-election violence.
Before post-election violence. And even after independence immediately, we said we have a police force that is the face of the colonialists. So we need to have a force that is friendly, people-friendly. And it came in 1975, this is when now things were getting thick. And then we said we need to have reforms in the police service. And in the 1990s, when I was just a greenhorn in the police, during the clamor for multipartyism, part of the agenda, apart from removal of Section 2A, there were calls for police reforms. That did not happen. So what we are getting now is basically what we've not been implementing. And this is where we are going. And if you look at the Maraga, what Maraga has recommended and his team is clearly what was in the Work Commission report. It was captured in the Ransley report in 2009. 2010, after the promulgation of the new constitution, we had another Tatas Naikuni Commission still talking about police reforms. 2023, we have another task force talking about police reforms. Yet, all the other recommendations have not been implemented. Mm-hmm. We tried the 2010 constitution, we brought in the National Police Service Commission. Now they are being blamed for not performing their duty as per the constitution. We need to ask ourselves, why is that happening? Mm-hmm. There is a reason that we are not ready to face and say, this is where the problem is. Mm-hmm. And clearly, for this implementation to take place, we need what we call a political capital. Let us ask ourselves, does this government have political capital to be able to implement these changes? And why are we talking about political capital? I'll give an example of Georgia. 2004, President Mikhail had a 96% mandate. He was given 96% mandate by the people. And when he got in, the first thing he did was reform the police. And the people were ready to work with him towards achieving this. And in 2 years, 2004 to 2006, Georgia now has what we call a model police service. We can go and copy from those people. So without political capital, and this is what Kibaki had in 2007, 202, 207, he lost it. And from that time, we've been trying to reform the police. We've come up with a raft of measures, but nothing has been implemented. And why is that so also? The police have been a pillar of support for these regimes. And due to this, they have been given a free rein to indulge not only in corruption, but outright criminality. And unless we disengage the police from politics, then all these measures that are coming up, all these reforms you're talking about, will not happen.
Mm-hmm. Dimas, he's talking about political, that kind of a political muscle that is needed to be able to implement some of these, recommendations. And I'm here asking myself, what else is needed other than the head of state really taking this head on and saying that he wants to? Actually, when he came into power, one of the immediate things that he spoke about was exactly that. And I wouldn't say it's President William Ruto alone. We've seen this with the previous regimes. Every time we have a new head of state, we almost immediately expect that there's going to be reforms in several institutions. Key among them is the police service. Yes. Every time after election. So what sort of political goodwill are we looking for, or what else is needed?
Well, talking about politics, we promulgated a new constitution in 2010, and the laws that created the different organs that are now comprising what we know as the police, the Independent Police Oversight Authority, the National Police Service Commission, the Independent National Police Service, were enacted in 2011. But by 2014, we already had laws passed by Parliament that that were gutting some of these independent powers that the National Police Service had, that the National Police Service Commission had. Mm-hmm. Key among them was the power to competitively appoint the Inspector General and his deputies. Mm-hmm. In this report, we see that the task force recommends that we go back to that model where the Inspector General is publicly vetted, is selected among people who apply, basically going back to what the law was originally. And you can tell that this was the first thing attacked because someone somewhere was not comfortable with the powers that had gotten away from the executive. This is what allowed a person to transfer a police officer overnight, telling them you'll go to the north or something like that. And so we are seeing a manifestation of, yes, we have come to a point where we need to interrogate how our policing works. But the answers are obvious. The culprits are here, the ones who passed those laws in the guise of fighting terrorism. Yet, there was no real issue among the relationship between the executive and the command of the police. Mm-hmm. The police reforms demanded an independent police service, operationally and financially. Mm-hmm. We have seen attempts by the current regime to give the police financial autonomy, which is very important. Mm-hmm. But these are the things that were fought tooth and nail. And as we say now we've seen the recommendations, but do we have that political wherewithal to say, yes, now we need a police that even if we have maandamano, even if we have issues of someone saying something that is politically incorrect, will the police now come in to be used as a hammer? Will we have an Inspector General who is beholden only to the regime and not to the constitution? Because that is what happened. And remember that the first Inspector General and the deputies were hounded out of office. Yes? Because there was that feeling that this is too much power for this institution. And that institution was also starved. And so even if you look at now the National Police Service Commission, are we saying that because it is alleged that the National Police Service Commission acquiesced its powers to the... It was usurped by the commanders. By the commanders. Mm-hmm. The commanders sit in the National Police Service Commission. So we are indicting in the commission, yet we are letting other people off the hook who were also party to the problems that we are seeing. And so there's a lot to interrogate. Let us hope that this time round the political will is sufficient, because when we have a good police, we have a safer country, everyone is happy. Yeah.
They are a critical pillar in the well-being of this particular nation, and we'll continue having this conversation in just a bit, and we welcome your views in the meantime on social media at Safina_Cheng, at Citizen TV. Kenya is our official social media handle, and of course you can use the hashtag Daybreak. We will be sampling some of them and the questions you have in the course of this conversation. For now, we take a very short break. We will be back in just a bit.